And now we'll do the chant before we do the Torah reading. Ki mitzion, taking out the Torah. Ki mitzion teitze Torah, udvar Adonai merushalayim. Mitzion teitze Torah, udvar Adonai merushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah le'ama Yisrael b'kedushato. Baruch shenatan Torah le'ama Yisrael b'kedushato. Ayalalai, 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 lalo. Ayalalai, 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 ayalilalai, ayalalilalo. Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Baruch shenatan Torah le'ama Yisrael b'kedushato. Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu rach haolam, asher bachar banu im kol ha'amin, ve'natan lanu et Torato, brucha at shechinanu tenet ha'Torah. Amen. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Welcome those of you who have just joined us for Torah study. Glad to have you all here. So we enter the book of Shemot. I'm going to just give me 1 second to grab books for folks here. There's going to be another one over here. Excuse me, doggy. Do you know how to find it, or do you need help?
I need help.
Okay. Just give me 1 sec to open it up for folks here. It's also going to be on the screen, but sometimes it's fun to read it in the book too. Here we go. We're at the very beginning of Shemot.
Thank you.
The book of Exodus, the very foundation for liberation theology. Yahoo! Right? But those seeds of liberation, those seeds of transformation were planted in Genesis, in the beginning, literally in Bereshit. In the beginning, God called forth to the void, to the vast empty space, and said, "Let there be light. Let seeds sprout and give forth life." All of that is also, right, the seeds of transformation, the seeds of liberation. Seeds freeing themselves from the seeds, becoming plants, human beings becoming human beings, animals becoming animals, all of it. And here we start with this book of liberation, the Exodus, where we become liberated from our constricted place, right? From Mitzrayim, the place of constriction. And what a weekend to be reading this, right? What a weekend. We have the inauguration, which for a lot of us might feel like a very constricted place, actually a narrow consciousness, this incoming new leader. We have on Monday, Martin Luther King Day, a celebration of a great leader, a liberator. And we have a tenuous yet real ceasefire that might bring relief for people, will actually liberate some Israelis, and some Palestinians will also be liberated this weekend, God willing. So these are 3 big events, and it was amazing to me when I thought about them overlapping with this beginning of this book of liberation for us. And we start reading this book, and it starts with a new king arose. A new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. We'll go into that in a minute, but here we are on the weekend before a new leader arises in our country, a leader who I think many of us, if not all of us, would agree doesn't really understand or embrace any of the values of liberation, of justice, of love, of care, of humility, and of compassion. So one of the things that this parsha, there's so much to it. This is, Austin and I were talking about this parsha last week and this week about it covers so much. So many years happen so quickly in this parsha. So one of the questions I want us to just be thinking about as we're reading it is, why are things left out? Like, what might we want to hear details about in the story that are not there? And then also, this story is about a leader, right? We meet Moses in this parsha, and some of the commentators talk about the fact that Moses is this perfect leader, but we know he's not perfect. We throughout the story of Exodus, we learn, and throughout the rest of the Torah, we see how imperfect Moses is, and yet he has some characteristics that we could look to as models for good leadership. And certainly, we need good leaders, and we need movements and people involved in movements that have ethical, moral foundations that we can align with. So as we read this parsha, I just want us to reflect upon, and I'll interrupt, of course, as I do, what we're among other things that we'll be talking about, but what do we notice are some of the characteristics of Moses as a leader that we think are characteristics that we want to uplift, and what might be some that are characteristics that we don't really think are so great, that we don't necessarily want to uplift. So for those of you who haven't done Torah study, I'll just tell you what we do is we will read it off the screen, and folks here, you have it in front of you. And someone will read in English, and at some point, actually fairly quickly today, I'll interrupt with some questions, and then we'll open it up for some reflections and conversations on the questions, or other folks will have their own questions, and then we'll read some more, and on and on. There might be a point, because it's a really rich parsha, where I say we're not going to interrupt anymore so we can get through it, and then we'll go back. But we'll see how that goes with time. Okay? All right. So before we even start this, these are the names of the sons of Israel. Someone else is going to read it, but I'm just going to read this one part. Who came to Egypt with Jacob. This is a repetition from the ending of the book of Genesis. So they repeat, these are the names of the sons of Israel. And if you remember last week, I talked about the importance of naming in my video drasha we sent out. So here we are again, naming the sons of Israel, excuse me. So would somebody like to unmute and read in English?
I will.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground.
I'm going to interrupt you here for a second, Jacqueline. Thanks. Let's go back for a moment to where it says a new king arose that did not know Joseph. There we go. Thank you. So there's an interesting conversation amongst the commentators about this, because how could they kind of wonder how could the new Pharaoh, right, not know at least about Joseph, right? If you remember, Joseph became second in command to the previous Pharaoh, or maybe many pharaohs previously. We don't really know. And he amassed wealth for Pharaoh and land. So how is it that the leader doesn't know that Joseph did that? Like, how does that happen? How does he not remember that Egypt, that is under the rule of the Pharaoh, and all the land and all the money and all the wealth is Pharaoh's from Joseph? And so there's this discussion about the fact that one of the things that's happening here, in addition to this whole liberation struggle that's happening, is that this Pharaoh is ungrateful. And then there's a midrash that talks about Moses being really a grateful person. And it's a contrast between the ingratitude of the Pharaoh and the gratitude of Moses. And so one of the characteristics and one of the elements of freedom and of a leader is to have gratitude. And here the king couldn't even remember what Joseph did for the king. Now, some of the commentators talk about how great Joseph was for everyone because he ensured that everyone had enough food during the famine. But as we discussed together, the way Joseph did that was by taking the food that they grew in the years of abundance and taking their money and their land and giving it to Pharaoh. So, but at least we can it's hard to understand how the Pharaoh could not know at least of Joseph, right? Does anyone want to reflect on that, or we'll keep going? And feel free.
Do we know who is this king in Egypt?
We don't. No.
You know, I have a neighbor who is a evangelical Christian, and she likes to ask me if I know Jesus. So I wonder, I mean, I told her I know of Jesus, but I don't, not like that, So I wondered, I did not know Joseph, did not, maybe he was aware, but didn't. And how much time passed is another thing, more practically, that
Right.
between those two. Mhm.
Right, but you'd think like the story would be handed down, right? Yeah, Pamela.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering if, as you said, it doesn't, he knows of Joseph, but right after that, it goes into why, there were, about the numerous Israelites and all that. Could it be that he knows of Joseph, but not about that the Israelites are his people? And that's why it's not a contradiction to start killing the Israelites, even though Joseph played such a big part in Egypt. No, just a thought.
Interesting. Yeah, another thought along those lines is he actually knew Joseph, and the Egyptians knew Joseph, and they weren't so thrilled with what he did, right? So there was resentment. So I think I'm seeing Austin, and then Riley, and then Liz, and then Glenn.
Hi. So this isn't really, this is just a little bit but after what you're talking about, but it deals with the king. I just noticed a great similarity with current situations with this king, how he's dealing with these Israelites, right? Like, it sounds very familiar. Look at the Israelite people are much too numerous for us, right? With all of these ICE raids and everything going on, with the immigrants in this country, this seems almost like the spot on argument that the powers that be are kind of using, the same as this king. So I just thought that was interesting.
right. You beat me to it.
Oh,
Beautiful.
sorry.
No, it's great. It's beautiful. Thank you. Yes, this is the same language and the same fear mongering, really, right? That we see both here in the United States regarding immigrants and also in the discussions that happen in Israel vis-a-vis Palestinians, right? There's too many of them. If we give them full rights and equality, there'll be more of them than us. They'll rise up with our other enemies and control us. It's all, yes, thank you, Austin.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
that's paradoxical.
Yeah. So then I think if I'm looking in the order, I'm seeing the hands. So Riley and then
So the other thing I'm wondering about is if at some level he doesn't realize the qualities of Joseph, that Joseph might in fact fight back, or that Joseph in fact um, has a power in this community and has brought them together. And so he almost doesn't understand the legacy that he's facing in dealing with this choice. And I agree with Austin as well, like the very fact that they're saying that. And I do also wonder if there's a certain amount of related to the current president that is about to happen tomorrow. If there's also not a certain amount of no one else gets credit but me
right.
as well. So yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful. Okay, Glenn, and then I think it's Claire. I'm having a hard time reading the names. Glenn, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was very interested in your early comment about rabbinic sort of commentary on this, that it wasn't so much. I'm wondering about the word to know, and there are various definitions of to know. One is that aspect of to know in the sense of to really feel at one with the person. And the fact that this was a new Pharaoh, and it maybe wanted to distinguish, didn't really know his own previous Pharaoh. He didn't feel any compassion for what had risen and what Joseph was a part of. I guess the question I have is, in the Hebrew, to know, is there anything in the Hebrew of to know that leads us to this aspect of compassion or a lack of understanding or not seeing what is truly in the best interests of his people?
Yeah, so the word is yada, which is to know, which also can be, sometimes we'll read that with when a man knows a woman intimately. So obviously that's not the meaning. So I think it's just really like he did not know. But the rabbis are asking, like, how is that? And so that's where they come up with this discussion of, well, it might be understandable that they didn't know Joseph, right? This is generations later. But to not know the story of Joseph is what they're grappling with here. It's right. Now you had it right there, line 8. Yeah.
Yeah. But to know the story of Joseph, in
Joseph.
a sense, is to know the story of the previous ruler's relationship with Joseph,
Correct.
in a way. And there might have been a strong unwillingness in this new Pharaoh to know that story, because it would constrain him in what he can do in the way he could go forward as well.
What you're saying is that if he really knew what Joseph did for the Pharaoh, then he'd be less likely to oppress the people because he would
exactly.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting, but then he gets afraid of them becoming so numerous, right? Thank you for that, Glenn. Claire, am I reading your name right? I'm just too far from the screen.
Yeah, no, you're good. It's Claire Julian. But thank you, and thank you for just facilitating this wonderful experience. It's my first time with you all. Yeah, I would kind of go along with Riley and with Glenn. I was thinking along the same lines. He didn't really know the heart of Joseph. He didn't know the intention and the work, the humanitarian kind of work. He didn't know it in a spirit of love or compassion. There was something else I was going to add, and it just flew away. Oh, I think it was maybe intentional to just diminish um, his association with that. So to just kind of act pretty arrogantly, I don't know who that is, just to kind of diminish the work that was involved there. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anyone here? Either of you want to add anything? Yeah, please.
Sure. A previous pharaoh from Trump would be Roosevelt, FDR, and he made changes in the economy with the New Deal and the WPA that brought riches and strength back to capitalism and made the capitalists rich, especially in the 50s. And Trump and the Republicans now don't remember or don't care about helping the working class or the middle class that helped them be rich earlier in the 20th century.
Beautiful, thank you. Add anything? No?
I second what he said.
Okay, let's go back up to line.
Can I say something, Rabbi?
Yeah, sorry.
It's Joyce.
Yeah. Oh, and
I don't think I have a raised hand on the bottom of my screen. I was raising it physically, but maybe it wasn't visible. I think Claire said what I was thinking, only she said it more clearly, what I was thinking, and it's going to sound flippant, but I think it has meaning, is Pharaoh is king of denial. So there's a denial factor, and that's, I think, what Claire was saying. Yeah, he might have known, but he didn't want to know, and he would deny the facts. It certainly resonates today. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Brent.
Okay, so this is Brent's partner, Sherry.
Hi, Sherry.
And I wanted to hi, how are you? I just wanted to say that I think maybe it was that he didn't know him because he didn't was not part of his generation, that it was a generation, it talks about that all the sons of all of Joseph was not around anymore. The brothers, the sons, and everybody, they had all passed away. So it seems to me like it was a generational gap. Maybe, like I don't know him because he's not part of my generation. And now all of Israel is a new generation, and all of Egypt is a new generation. So it's a different mindset.
Right. Right. Thank you. Okay, Deborah, are you raising your hand? Am I seeing that? So, Austin, if I'm not seeing a hand and calling on someone, let me know, please, because I only see some of the folks. But Deborah, you're still muted, my dear.
Thank you. It could have also have been what we have, and that's a leader who constantly changes his goals and doesn't acknowledge them and is just simply entitled to
Well,
more and more and more.
right. I think that's probably fair of pharaohs to say.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Thank you. Can we go up to line 9, I think, where I just want to start. Okay. Yeah, I just want to start reading again there because we had so much conversation. I want to make sure we're tracking.
Is that, does that start with, and he said to his people?
Yes, and this is where Austin made his point about the analogy between what we're reading here and what we're seeing today in the discourse around immigrants and refugees. So, yeah.
Okay. And he said to his people, Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and with all sorts of tasks in the field. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. A certain number of the house of Levi went and took into his household as his wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, this must be a Hebrew child. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter answered, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, I drew him out of the water. Sometime after that, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labors. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsmen. He turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, why do you strike your fellow? He retorted, who made you chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Moses was frightened and thought, then the matter is known. When
I'm going to
Pharaoh
interrupt. I'm going to pause here for a moment because we just read a lot. Thank you. So a couple things are happening here, right? So Pharaoh imposes more taskmasters and harder work, and they become more fertile, they grow and expand, and they spread out. And so that's a really interesting thing to me. Like the oppression doesn't diminish them, it strengthens them. It makes them more fertile and helps them become more prevalent in the society. They get more strength. It's an interesting contradiction to me, right? Like you'd think that they'd become weaker, but they don't. They became stronger. And I wonder if that's actually what happened, or if it's back to the fear mongering of they saw them as becoming stronger, right? They just saw them that way because they created this whole story of fear within their society that made them scared of the so-called other, right? And this is where you get the beginning of the teachings. About 36 times in our Torah, it says to love the stranger, to care for the stranger because you were strangers. And right here, we see the beginning of the treatment of the stranger, right? The oppression and the taskmasters beating them up and putting more labor on them. So that was something that was just stood out to me in how we understand what happens when we oppress people. Is it that we end up, when we're so scared of the other, we make them like giants? If you remember, there's a scene later on in the Torah where the spies are sent out to go scope the land, and some of the spies come back and say they were giants, right? And Joshua and Caleb said, no, they weren't so big. So this is to me, a story of what do we see through our lens as much as what's really happening in the world. Andre.
I'm wondering, later on in the Torah, all of the, quote, other peoples that Moses and his people encounter, that they fight, they kill, they displace. So is welcoming and loving the stranger something that just comes and goes within the Torah, or how is this actually realized later on?
Yeah, so that's a beautiful question. So I'm going to tell a little teaching here that many of you have heard many times from Rabbi Lerner and from me, and that's the story of the different voices in the Torah, right? So there are at least 2 voices in the Torah. I'm going to focus on 2 right now, but there are many voices in the Torah, right? So there's the voice of domination and power over, and there's the voice of love and kindness and care and generosity. So the voice that I'm uplifting now, and that we hear so many times: love the stranger, you were once strangers in the land of Egypt, take care of the vulnerable, redistribute wealth, all of these beautiful teachings, never again, all of these beautiful teachings are from the voice of the God of love, let's say, the divine compassion, the one who sees the suffering of the other, El Roi, all these different names of the divine. El Roi, the one who sees, Rachamin, the one of compassion, Yud-He Vav-He, the God of transformation that we'll hear about in a couple minutes, in a little bit. All of these are gods of love and care and kindness and generosity. But our Torah also includes kind of another voice, because it's written by human beings. And all of us carry within us both voices: the voice of love and care and kindness and generosity, and the voice of domination and fear and power over. And the Torah you can kind of read as a debate between these 2 voices, right? Whether it's the 2 voices within us as individuals or the 2 voices within people in the society at the time. And so the stories of conquering the land and slaughtering and wiping out everyone, horrific violence, horrible stuff is in there, is that voice of domination and power over. And I argue that, we have a choice of which voice we want to uplift, and I would even argue of which one is the true voice of the divine, right? And the true voice of the divine is the one that wants to see life flourish, that wants to see people and the world be healthy and flourishing and caring and loving and kind. But we live in class societies, we live in societies that tell us we need to have power over each other to survive, that there's scarcity and not enoughness. And yet the Torah tells us all over and over again, there's enough. You're going to gather your food on Friday and you're not going to worry about it until after Shabbat again, because there will be enough manna for you, even in the desert. There will always be enough. But we bump up against the constrictions of society, the stories that are told to us, that we tell ourselves, that we grow up in, that we hear on the media, that the leaders tell us, and we turn toward the worldview of fear and domination. And so, Andre, that's how I'm understanding those two different stories. They are both there, you're right. The question is which we want to uplift and which we want to hold on to and which we want to minimize. Thank you for the question. Pam.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, to shift to something else, why it seems to be common understanding that Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household, with Pharaoh's daughter raising him, but the Parsha seems to suggest she gave, Miriam took Moses to be suckled, and that Moses's mother, and it wasn't until he was an adult that she gave him over to Pharaoh. And those are Batya. And those are very different things, because someone who grew up in the Egyptian household and then stands up for the oppressed versus actually growing up knowing he's a Hebrew and then going to Egyptian. I'm just wondering, and it just seems to be understanding the common understanding that Batya raised him, but doesn't seem to what the Parsha suggests.
So the way I understand this Parsha and the way a lot of rabbis understand it is that he was raised until he no longer nursed. So he was raised maybe for, like, let's say the first 3 years of his life. So he grew up surrounded in the Hebrew culture, in the Hebrew language, knowing who his people were, hearing the stories of his people. And then at some point in his toddler years, let's say, he goes and lives in the Pharaoh's home. And then he's raised by.
Okay, I guess I was misinterpreting grew up, because I thought it was saying.
He was an adult.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So one of the, before I forget this, one of the qualities that remember I asked the qualities that we want in a leader. So one of the qualities was standing up for the oppressed. That Moses not only saw that they were oppressed, but he intervened, right? So I'm going to put a pause on that for a moment, because I have some reflections and thoughts about that, but I want to get to Roger and Mike, because your comments were before I said that.
Oh yeah, just a historical note. I was reading in a Bible commentary that the name Moses is probably Egyptian for son, and that not all the tellings of the story talk about his birth in that way. And for centuries, wealthy families would send their babies out to be nursed. And I'm wondering if this story isn't part of sort of the nation building, which is, what the Torah is all about, and that Moses in fact was an Egyptian prince, but you had to sort of change his parentage so that we could claim him as our great liberatory leader. Just that.
Totally possible, right? Beautiful. Thank you. Mike.
I'm fascinated by your two voices commentary. Last week after study, I was talking with a family member, and I was telling him that I was reading Jacob's rebuke of Reuben and Simeon and Levi as you can't do revenge like that, right? You can't justify revenge even over something awful and applying it to Gaza. And he came back, well, so I said, Torah is not about that, he came back and said, well, Torah says not just kill Amalek, but kill Amalek's children and so on and so forth, right? So there it is. And my personal growth, I said, okay, let's pause it there because I know about going back and forth and the nothing good coming out of that. But yeah, I mean that's such a primary thing to wrestle with in being Jewish, right? These two voices in our Torah, right? And what do we do with that? Can we really? I mean, I'm hearing you say it. I respect you, and of course, I'm here. I love what you bring. But can we really say, let's put that one to the side. Let's say that's the human hand. That's not God hand. I mean, I want to. I want to. That's how I live my life anyway. But I know it's there too, right? It's such a tension.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's an answer, but that's if you have any more to add.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's there, and I think part of it's there so that we have to grapple with that, right? You just said like it was my personal growth to not continue in a discussion that I didn't think was going to be productive or healthy or life-serving, right? So just like that moment was an opportunity for you, the stories in the Torah and the voice of domination and power over is an opportunity for us to look at the times and the places in our lives where we actually go to the worldview of domination, where we embrace that worldview and then grapple with it and look where it leads us. This is where the Torah tells us it leads us is to slaughter and violence. So yeah, I mean, people could say that's the voice of God. Certainly many Jews and many others do. They use the Torah Netanyahu did it, right? We have to wipe out Amalek right after October 7th. I mean, God, what? But so we're going to always choose to uplift the voice in the Torah that validates our worldview, right? But the people I want to be surrounded with, right? The people I want to be the leaders and to be part of the movements that I want to be a part of are going to uplift the voice of the worldview of love, of solidarity, of care. And whether that's, actually a voice of divine source or whether that's the voice of the ethical, moral foundation of humanity within each of us, I don't know that I care totally, right?
Yeah.
That's the voice that is, for me, going to bring forth and allow us to live in a world of love and justice and abundance and care that's generative, right? That's sprouting seeds of liberate. Like if we're back in Genesis, like Genesis is this incredible story of sprouting seeds, right? That's always a generative place. If that's where we want to be, that's the voice I'm going to choose to pull out in the Torah. And then I'm not going to just pretend the other voice isn't there, because people here are always going to remind me that it's there, of course, and challenge me, which is great. Like Andre did, like, what do we do with this other voice? I always say that it's there to tell us what not to be, how not to live. It's not a model for what to do. It's a model, that voice is a model for what not to do and then how to grapple with it. Both that voice within us and that voice within the larger society.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you because it's just very validating, because my response to him was like, well, I guess you can use the Torah to justify genocide. You can use the Torah to forward love, and we'll leave it there, right? And make our choices. So thank you.
Thank you. Glenn, and then Joyce Lynn.
Thank you, Rabbi. Two quick. One thing that came up for me was a question. So the Torah is set. The stories of the Torah, I'm thinking, are set in the historical reality of a time. And so one question's got to do with the reality of that time. What do we know about the person who has died in that time? It's often said that one of the things that motivates the terrorist is that they will live again in heaven, so to speak. So if that was a part of the historical belief, general belief across both for the Jews, for the Egyptians, etc., then killing itself in that sense, at that time, historical time, might not have been such a horrible fate. I'm not suggesting that we should bring that forward to the current time. That's not what I'm suggesting. But so that was one question. And then the other part goes to your suggestion that the voice we hear in our inside, the internal voice, that's always saying that the other is more powerful, that we can't confront the other because they're so powerful, never gets challenged in actual confrontation. And because it never gets challenged in actual confrontation, we don't know the truth of that. But we don't know how to bring forward a reasonable, kind conversation because we're so afraid of what's going. We're putting much more power in the other. You know, I remember standing quietly in front of my father while he was punishing me a long time ago, saying, "You're not going to break me." And in that moment, actually furthering quietness, silence, non-confrontation that has led throughout my life. That's
Wow.
how, I guess that's what I wanted to say.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It's really profound. Yeah. In terms of the history at the time, so obviously at the time, the Egyptians believed that they did live in the next life, right? They buried their slaves with them. And I don't believe that's part of the Hebrew belief, though, that we came back to life. There is a belief in some type of afterlife in the Jewish world, but I don't think it lives in the Torah so much, right? Like it's more about living in this life, right? We don't have the belief in Judaism that you're living in this life for the next life, right? You're creating justice and living in this life for this life. And in fact, in the Torah, there's a lot of discussion about the value of life, and the rabbis then in the commentary even uplift that even more. So the stories of an eye for an eye or putting someone to death, the rabbis really, what's the word I'm looking for? It's more than they challenge it. They basically say that if the death penalty is enacted in a society at any time, the society is unjust. So the rabbis really uplift life. It's really a Torah of life, which is, I guess, another reason why I'm going to turn to the voice in the Torah that uplifts life, not death. You know, there's so much in our Torah, and I just did the little commentary I did after the ceasefire about choose life, right? That's in the Torah, choose life, don't choose death. Don't be a society of death. Don't be a society that uplifts death. Joyce Lynn, thank you for your patience.
Fascinating. That was such a powerful share, Glenn. From a metaphysical point of view, it seems to me Moses, we had this watery beginning, water being consciousness, symbolizing consciousness, is eventually that phase of consciousness that will lead us out of the dark places, out of the thoughts that lead to action of greed and hate and revenge. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Thank you. I love bringing that in. The water is connected to consciousness. And so I was praying the morning Amidah. I prayed every morning on my walks. And the first prayer is about being grateful for our ancestors. And so I was thinking about what is it about the ancestors that I try to integrate that makes meaning for me, right? Because the prayers are about making meaning for us, right? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, really, our ancestors, the story of our ancestors is that they rejected the constricted consciousness of their time and turned toward a different worldview. It wasn't as advanced as I would want it to be, but still, they took the constricted consciousness of their time and they turned away toward an expanded consciousness. So I love this idea of this water being a symbol of that expanded consciousness, right? And so there's in this parsha, there's this beautiful midrash that the parents at the time of the decree to kill all the firstborns, that the married couples basically divorced so that they wouldn't have sex and give birth to sons who would be killed. Okay, so Miriam has this big argument with her parents and says, don't give Pharaoh that much power. And what about if daughters are born and you don't know that your son will be killed? It's as, they talk about it being a prophetic knowledge that Moses was going to be born and he was going to be the leader. And so they remarry. And then they have Moses. And we read over it, but when she sees her baby, and it says, it's often translated as, and she saw he was beautiful. Moses was beautiful. It's kitov. She saw that he was kitov, good. The whole beginning of Genesis, every day, remember it says, and God saw it was good. Kitov. So to me, this is another place where the unfolding of divine manifestation is kind of happening, right? Because kitov, God saw it was good. I just that was brought out when I read that. I was like, it's the same language as in Genesis. How beautiful is that thread that gets pulled through? And so she saw it was good. And so she saw it was good, and so she put him in a basket in the Nile. And Pharaoh's daughter knew it was a Hebrew baby because no other babies were being put in the Nile, right? And this is an incredible story, right, of women being the very foundation of liberation theology, of liberation, right? Miriam tells her parents to have a child. Moses' mom gives birth to the baby, puts it in a basket, gives it to Miriam to put in the Nile. The midwives, before all that, the midwives refused to carry out Pharaoh's decree. And we don't know, when it says Hebrew midwives, it's very unclear if it's that they're Hebrew, in other words, that they're actually Hebrew women, or that they're women who are midwives for Hebrew people. And I just read yesterday when I was preparing that there's a midrash that the Hebrew midwives were Miriam and Yocheved, Moses' sister and Moses' mother. So that's a beautiful connection. And then Pharaoh's daughter saves Moses. The very essence of the power of oppression, and she chooses to save his life. Now, Roger's going to say, well, this was all a story, and it could be true, right? We don't really know if there was ever a Moses, We don't know if there was ever a child that was saved or any of this, but this was a nation-building story, I agree. And it's a beautiful nation-building story, and the foundation of it is women standing up to oppression and saying no. And so it's a feminist story too, that often doesn't.
That's gorgeous.
Beautiful. So I want to, before you jump in, Pamela, if I could say one or two more things. I just want to add, so I want to return to my question of the characteristics of a leader. So Moses, in addition to having this water consciousness, which I love, Moses, right, intervened when he saw oppression. But how did he intervene? What did he do first? The first time he saw the taskmaster, killed him, right? He engaged with a violent act. So I'm not sure I want that in a leader. I like the idea of a leader who's willing to intervene in injustice, right? Like when the Hebrew slaves are fighting with each other, he intervenes again, right? And tries to tell them to stop doing that. And then he gets scared and he flees. But so the idea of not just seeing oppression, the rabbis say he doesn't just turn his back. He actually steps in. Now, we could argue about how one might choose to step in, or as Mike said, sometimes you might choose to step out. But being aware of injustice and stepping in, and this year, not by leaders by any stretch of the imagination, but by average people around the world, have stepped in and stood up and said, what's happening? This genocide is not okay. And people have tried various ways to intervene by bringing a case in the International Court of Criminal Justice, by standing together, trying to bring food into Gaza. Like, there's many ways that people have intervened. And we don't necessarily think of them as leaders because they're all of us standing up and intervening. So it's, I do appreciate that aspect of Moses. Pam, thank you for holding on there for a moment for me.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the the role of Miriam and Moses's mom and Moses' daughter. I think I had written my own midrash, which I'll share eventually, from the point of view of Batya. But I think we don't know much about her. We don't even know her real name. But I think people underplay, or whatever the word is, of her role, because I'd like to think of her as, along with Miriam and Moses' mother, of coming together to save the Hebrew people. She had the choice to make. She went against her own people as a princess and went and saved, she had an inner conflict. I'm guessing she had an inner conflict, devotion to her own people, which eventually what she did was the destruction of her own people in order to bring up Moses in a way that he would resist. So I would like to think of Batya as playing a big role as another I like the way you put all the women together, and we think about her role in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Definitely. Claire Julian, please.
Oh, I'm loving this conversation. Thank you. I'm a therapist here in Salt Lake City. There's a lot of focus now on accessing right brain consciousness in healing. And I'm wondering if those two voices that God so identified with God's creation, and that a part of that is left brain, right brain kind of thinking. So there's goal-oriented thinking, objective, and then there's relational, right brain thinking. And I'm wondering if those are the two voices that God is giving expression to. And Moses acts with violence. He was very, in a way, left-brained in that kind of reaction. But I think a lot of our human consciousness is about accessing the other side of our way of understanding and being conscious of things. So just a thought, but I'm just really loving this conversation.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I totally love that. It's beautiful. Love this Torah conversation. Thank you. Mark and then Stephen.
Well, there are a couple things. One is that Moses did not just strike and kill the taskmaster.
Wow. Hello.
Oops.
But Moses hid. He was in this fear mode, and he hid and he ran away. He didn't really come out as a person of the tribe, so to speak.
Mhm.
And that was his evolution to do that and to say, "Here I am. This is who I am." But at first, it was very fear-based. It seemed to me, as well. Part of the kingdom complex. And then one last thing is just the obvious is that unless we're really indigenous peoples here, we've all been strangers in a strange land here where we live, in that fear of the other. And actually to think that there are probably a lot of indigenous folks who come up from the South to come into the land pretty much that they've been born in, that their ancestry comes from, unless we, the Western Europeans have honored treaties, which we haven't. We're all illegals and to a certain degree.
Mhm.
So here's a lineage that's very interesting at this time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Steve.
Yeah, it's Stephen Sondheim from Chicago. I like to think of generally of women's nature of being nurturing, mothering. And I even see this in the animal kingdom, or at least of mammals. And so it's quite understandable that upon seeing a baby in a basket, the Egyptian princess felt nurturance. And I mean, that's one of men can be nurturing too, but in my view, I see that as a more as the nature of many women, of womanhood, of femininity. Okay, I wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yes, so if I've mixed feelings about if that's inherent to women or if that's socialized in women, or probably both and still she knew the decree of her father, right? She was still part of the ruling elite, and we could see many women leaders or many women spouses of male leaders who do not have that level, or daughters of male leaders. I'm thinking of Ivanka Trump right now, who don't have that level of care for the other. And so I remember during Trump's first presidency, I wanted to believe that we could reach Ivanka's heart and get her to get around the child separation policies and the Muslim ban, to all the awful policies that we're going to sadly, undoubtedly see again. And there was this part of me that was like, well, I could reach her as a mother. But she wasn't operating in that role as a mother. She was operating in that role as a ruling elite with power and authority who wanted to hold on to and expand that power and authority. So I think that this is that tension right there between these two parts of ourselves. And I'd like to think that the nurturing part of all of us would be the part that is prevalent and overrides the power over. But I don't think it does necessarily. And the fact that it did for her, for Pharaoh's daughter, is, I think, part of what's miraculous. We could also say it was part of the divine intention of the way things unfolded. But it is a beautiful unfolding that she was able to do that.
I would say one more thing, and that is that as women progress and achieve past the glass ceiling, many of them become like men in the not so good aspects. But I like to hope that they would not take that on and deny their feminine nature. And I would like to hope there's room for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you. Rachel.
I also I'm an adoptive parent, so I always think of of Pharaoh's daughter and feel like she doesn't get enough attention. I like this discussion because she is getting attention, but I know that sometimes when I read this, I think if anybody writes my son's story and leaves me out of it,
Mm,
they're going to have trouble.
mm. Thank you for bringing that in. Thank you so much. Yeah, beautiful. Austin.
Hey, okay, so this is not really related to what we're talking about, if that's okay. I mean, it's about this Torah portion, but I just had a question, Rabbi, about a Hebrew word. So what I'm noticing is that the word for basket, that we're calling basket, is the same word that was used for Noah's Ark. Is it also the same word that's used for the Ark of the Covenant?
I don't believe so. I'd have to look in the Torah to see. But
Okay.
yes, your first part, yes. Thank you for bringing that in. It's such a
Yep.
beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Roger.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to note that regardless of Moses's parentage, like myself, he was probably greatly influenced by the attitudes of his older sister. So
I love it. Jacqueline.
Yes, I think in terms of nurturing, I think it's very plausible and common for, take Ivanka, for a woman to be very nurturing with her own children, but not to see that beyond the family. So yes, female nurturing, breastfeeding, etc. In the family, it can be very strong. Outside of the family, not so much or not at all.
Well, we can become very tribal. I'm trying to think of a different word, but very insulated in who we extend our compassion and our nurturing towards.
Yes, but it's a lot easier
Definitely.
to, you know, to extend it towards your own infant than towards, you know, general society in general. Ivanka. The other thing is, I'm always struck when reading this parsha that the women involved always act when they act justly. They have to be rather creative, and they have to kind of sneak around. They don't go to power directly, the powerful directly, and say, you should save Moses or whatever. It's usually in secret. And that's one reason they don't get enough credit.
Right. They have to figure out how to maneuver around systems and structures of power to enact their power. Yeah, beautiful point. Thank you. Glenn. No, you muted again. You unmuted. There you go.
Okay, there I go. Just to follow up a little bit about what Jacqueline just said, it's interesting, if I'm remembering correctly, before Moses killed, he looked around to see if anyone was watching.
Yeah, that's what Mark was.
And even though it would have been interesting to what the outcome would have been had someone been watching. In the case of Pharaoh's daughter, she was with her own handmaidens. There was nobody who was going to tell on her. She was, in fact, supported by this anonymity of what she did. In the case of the Ivanka, she was never anonymous, you know, and I think we're all, whatever our gender, we struggle with that issue of anonymity as being a protection, a curtain for what we do. Again, I want to share one very personal story. My mother and her two brothers grew up in a small city at the border of Poland and Russia. And her father came to this state to get enough money to bring them. While he was gone, I don't know, Cossacks, whoever came to the house and threatened my mother, her mother. And she was the oldest, and she stood up against them.
Mm.
She said, basically, you want to get to my mother, you have to come through me.
Mm.
So there's something there about feminine ferocity, feminine strength, that's really very, very powerful. But I don't think it's necessarily absent in the male gender.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessarily gender specific. It's something else.
Beautiful.
That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. It's a beautiful story. Thank you. So Brent or Brent's partner, whose name I don't remember, forgive me.
That's okay. Sherry.
Sherry,
Thank you. Hi, Brett wants to say something too. We both want to say something. So I sort of look at Pharaoh's daughter and what she did as a leap of faith. A leap of faith. And it reminds me of what Esther, the story of Esther, when she went up to the king and spoke up for the people of Israel. I think of it as a leap of faith. You know, they could have lost their own lives, but they took a chance to save something that they thought was ketov, very good and important. And I think of it as a leap of faith. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Yes, this is Brent. It occurred to me we don't know what was happening. It could, well, on many levels we don't, but it could be that Egyptians, if assuming other male infants were taken down to the. Now it could be other families, women adopted children, Hebrew children that they knew would otherwise be killed, and maybe they made arrangements with families before they brought them to the Nile. Not everyone necessarily lived along the Nile. As we know, Egypt was
That's
spread
where it was
out,
concentrated.
So I'm thinking we're making some assumptions here about the Egyptian people, and adaptation may have been in order. That's my point. We don't know that. It might not have been unique. That she was Pharaoh's daughter was more unique. But as far as adopting male children, many cultures male children were preferred. Some still are. That's another topic. But it could have been if you're looking to adopt a male, here's a place to keep an eye on things. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's a valid point, definitely. Thank you for bringing that in. Rachel, do either of you want to say anything?
I think it's this idea of nurturing or of being able to nurture or nurture that which isn't one's own is the feeling of possessiveness. If we talk about Ivanka, how is Ivanka loved?
Right.
I mean, her father certainly isn't capable of loving anything that isn't like him.
Right. Yeah. It
So-
is definitely passed down. Thank you.
So you can expect a miracle from a man who failed to raise his children in ways to learn about humanities.
Right.
So you can expect from the guy.
Right. Definitely can't expect much from him. Yeah, please.
So I remember reading a book, I think, when I was a
A little
teenager.
bit louder, I think.
I remember reading a book when I was a teenager called The History of the Jews by Geisel or Gazel. And he said, and it came from a perspective of trying to look at it as actual history and not anecdotal or mythology, which sometimes there's more truth in mythology than just the facts. what the Bible has to teach, the Torah has to teach. And he said that whenever the Jews expanded their borders, not to protect themselves, but to be greedy, God would punish them and say, no, you can't do that. I don't know if there's a historical precedent for that, but that's a nice sounding thing. The history is repeated by the Jesus story, and I think in the Zoroastrians, of a baby that's hidden and then brought back. And even in ancient Greece, Oedipus was hidden because he had club feet and then came later to fulfill a destiny, though not as noble as Moses. And there's a quotation that was from Leo Rosten's Treasury of Jewish Quotations, and I don't remember who said it, if it was from but it said, the real slavery of Israel and Egypt was this: the Jews learned to endure it. And when I think of people in Gaza, and there is actually, it is good to endure, so maybe a replacement word would be put up with it. That the slavery is to put up with the oppression, and or even to the worse is to become part of the system and be the oppressor, part of the capitalist system, for example, in more overt ways than we have to put up with to survive. So the Moses myth has repeated itself in different cultures. There is a precedent about what teaches me is that what is the slavery that we have ourselves in this culture or perpetrate on others. And then I guess lastly, I want to say, if I lived in Israel, or if I was, people say, I'm a pacifist, but what would I do if I had been oppressed by the Zionist terrorists for 75 years? If I was Palestinian, who am I to say that I wouldn't want to kill? And who am I to say, if I lived in Israel and had different parents, that I would be a Zionist myself and be perpetrating terror on others, or imperialism? And so I have Hitler in me, and I have Moses in me, and the weakness of Moses, we haven't gotten to that, is he has doubts about being a leader, and I actually trust that kind of leader more, that doesn't think he's perfect, but doesn't want the job, but takes the job because he's the best one for it and has been chosen. And so to be the chosen people, of course, is not that we get to take all the land we want, but that we have a responsibility to be ethical and kind and lead humanity into evolving in a kinder, more beautiful way.
May it be so.
I guess the psychological part of human duality is the cause that forces me to become Lucifer or become Moses or Zoroaster. Mm-hmm. If I am not able or capable of reconciling these two opposing poles within my head, based on my experiences, my upbringing, and the way I grew up, therefore I have a potential to either follow Lucifer or follow Moses. And sadly, what we have witnessed in most part of the history is that individuals who are determined, however, their determination is not reflective of humanity. Clear example of it is when Netanyahu's defense forces go inside Palestine. They don't feel like that baby Palestinian or an older Palestinian or woman or man.
They don't see the humanity.
No, they don't see it.
Right.
Actually, I have Persian friends who were born in Tel Aviv, and they returned. And they were telling me, horrific stories that I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and it's sometimes it's blatantly obvious why some people turn out to be perpetrators, and sometimes it's a mystery that they could have abuse and then they turn out to turn it around and not become abusers themselves on an individual level or cultural level. It's a mystery why some people find the goodness in their hearts, to why one person is like Trump, whose father was a ghoul. If you saw the New Yorker magazine, a photo of Trump's father, and then his niece uh, speaks out and is not like part of a Trump family, and relates how, as a psychologist, how Trump acts in an evil
Right.
way.
Yeah, so we have these voices, right, inside ourselves, and they're informed by our childhood. They're informed by the society we live in. They're informed by who our teachers are, where we go to school. It's what we watch on TV, what we listen to, and all of it informs the choices that we make, and which voice is going to be more prevalent in our consciousness at any moment, right? We can shift at any moment, right? We might find ourselves in one moment in interaction where we're enacting violence and power over, and in another moment we might be nurturing and loving, like we just talked about with Ivanka. So it's like you said, which do we choose is so influenced by the milieu in which we live and in which we're raised. And if we're steeped in a society, I'm thinking of, like, we could think about Israel, or we could think about our society, that's happens a lot too. If we're steeped in a society where the main discourse by the leaders, by the media, by the educational systems, by the capitalist order, by the imperialist order, is a society that tells us that the way you're going to thrive and be safe is by enacting power over, by climbing up the social ladder and stepping on other people on the way, then we're going to be more likely to believe that and enact that and build a society that actually enacts that. If we are steeped in a society that tells us about love and care and kindness and generosity, that we experience that we embrace that, then we're more likely to create that consciousness and that society. So part of our work, right? Part of our work as social justice activists and seekers of a world of liberation, is to not only enact these actions that are loving and kind, but to also transform consciousness, our own and others, to work to uplift the consciousness of love and generosity and care. And so part of that requires somebody be willing to open up the back door back there. I think he needs to go out. Yes, I'm getting it open for you. Sorry about that. Just realized he's going back and forth between the doors. You can just leave it open for him and he'll figure it out. That for us, I lost my thought, so give me a second. For us to help people see that there's a choice, that we don't have to believe like Pharaoh taught his people, or that Trump or our leaders tell our people, or Netanyahu and their leaders tell their people, or leaders all over the place who care more about their power and their status than actual well-being of the people, that there is always a choice, and that embodying and living out a world of generosity and love and care does not make you weak. It does not mean you're more likely to end up being the oppressed or the underdog or not have your needs met, but actually means you're more likely to, because if we build a world that's generous, then there's more generosity. Then there's more than enough. Then there's plenty. And that's part of the work of our work as social justice seekers and activists, is to actually embody the spirit of generosity. And here's the tricky part about it, right? Not just with those who think like us, not just with those we love, but with the stranger, with the other. Now, does that mean that all of the those who seek to live in a world of power and domination, who are acting power and domination over others, are then going to suddenly like wake up and transform their consciousness? I always like to think of people as being mikvahd to wholeness. I use that as a verb, right? They're cleansed to their wholeness, to their fullness. No. But if I want that world, if I want to live in that world, then it's upon me to embody that world. And it's not only when it's easy to do it. I always used to say to my kids, like, it doesn't matter what your integrity is when it's easy. That's easy. It matters when it's hard. When what you really want to do is not be generous. When what you really want to do is embody domination and power over. How do you step aside and still step into compassion? I was reading a book by Father Richard Rohr, beautiful Christian theologian, teacher. And he said, if God can expand and include, why can't I? Or maybe shouldn't I? So it's a rather tall order, for sure. But it's a aspiration and an inspiration to us. And it's hard, right? So I'm gonna let these couple comments. You can have the couple comments, and then I want to say a few more words about the parsha because we didn't get through it, and there's some other really rich things I'm just going to touch on. But it's after 12, and so I'm just being conscious of time. It's been so rich. So Brent or Sherry or both, and then Andre.
Okay, so hi again. Thank you for your beautiful comments. I was just thinking how interesting. I just made a connection that Pharaoh's daughter challenged authority, and then Moses later on in his life challenges Pharaoh's authority.
Right.
So I just wanted to make that quick comment.
Thank you. Yeah.
Connection.
Thank you. Andre.
It's just and I do it all the time, placing things within historical context such as ours today, in which we're taught this and we hear messages, negative messages, horrible messages to do horrible things. I just wonder if human nature and consciousness has changed that much over the years, because it seems to me that if you do something horrible to somebody else or a group of people, you must know as a human that you would not want that to happen to you. You would know that would not be something which you would want to happen to you. So it seems to me this moral compass of actually knowing that something is wrong ought to be part of human nature. So when we make, I'm not saying that you, Rabbi, or others on the call are making excuses for people because of the context or even the historical context. That, well, in those days, that's what they did. We have to understand that unless human nature has changed, they would have known, people would have known that to do something harmful or horrible to somebody else was not something that you would want done to yourself, and that it was wrong. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think what happens, right, is we demean people so much, right? We start referring to them not as human beings, right? As creepy crawlies, as leeches, as sucker. Like, we use terminology that literally dehumanizes people. And so then we don't see that what we're doing is harming a human being, right? And I think that ultimately when we engage in that level of oppression of the other, of anyone, this is one of the things I've been thinking about a lot with soldiers in Israel right now, or soldiers throughout the world that engage in horrific acts, is that we lose our own humanity. Somehow we've disconnected ourselves from our own humanity. And that's really the downfall of humanity, right?
Well, those supporting Zionism and the war in Palestine, they must know that they would not want somebody to come and kill their children and their families and destroy their homes and their libraries and their clinics. So how can they not know that this is wrong? And the percentage in this country and in Israel that have supported this war, and of course the percentage of politicians, it's unbelievable.
Right. But there's the distortions and lies, right, about who these people are and self-defense. And I mean, we tell these stories so that we don't see that what we're doing is something that we wouldn't want to have done to us. Yeah. So Glenn, I'm gonna ask you to hold that thought or put it in the chat, if you will, just in the interest of time. So thank you. And thank you everyone for all your engagement and rich comments. So it's just a couple of things I want to highlight. So the other characteristic that you brought up, and I think someone else brought up, that Moses had, right, was a level of humility. He's like, I'm not up for this task. I stutter. I've got all these problems. So another thing about a leader potentially that we could think about is a level of humility, like I can't do it. And then even in the story, God says to Moses, you're not going to be alone. Moses recognizes that he can't do this alone. He's going to have his brother. He's going to have Miriam. And ultimately, right, he has the people. The people themselves have to be willing at some point to take the step that leads them to actually leave Egypt. And we're told that they didn't all leave. So not everyone was able to take that leap of faith. And it was a leap of faith, right? So then Moses meets this divine light in the burning bush, this divine source in the burning bush. And he asks who this God is, and he says, I will be who I will be. And this is a big Jewish theology, right? The divine is an unfolding reality. It's not contained. It's not limited. It's not static. The divine source will be who we can make God to be, because we are all part of the divine, and the divine is beyond us and more than us. But divine consciousness, we talked about this in the book of Genesis, divine consciousness itself unfolds in this story, in our story here, throughout the whole 5 books. And the question was, did human consciousness expand, Andre? You just asked that, like, did it really change over time? And I think that's still a question, right? But there is an expansion or a growth in consciousness that we can see, and yet it's still perhaps in a very adolescent stage, a very constricted place. And so one of the commentators said that as long as we are conscious of our roots when we went into Egypt, then it was not a spiritual exile. It was a physical exile, but we didn't lose our spiritual exile because we were still connected to our roots. So there was a geographic exile in Egypt, and then this physical exile. But as long as we stayed connected to our roots, we didn't have a spiritual exile. So I was thinking about this in relationship to where I see some of our people today. And it seems like we have now a home, if you will, in Israel, in Palestine. on other people's lands and all of that we know. But in our story anyway, we're not now in geographic exile, right? Some of us are in diaspora, but we have a home in our land. I'm using that in quotes, right? Like you all understand how I'm saying that. But perhaps we're having a spiritual exile. Maybe we flipped Exodus on its head. We may not be having a geographic exile, but we've lost the connection with the roots of our teachings of love and compassion, of kindness and generosity, where we can see the importance of loving the other, of loving the stranger. And so I'm not going to call on anybody at this point, just because of time, but feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. So I just want to ask us and offer the prayer and ask us to hold the prayer for ourselves, for Jewish people, and for all peoples, that that we can hold on to the teaching that we're going to get in a couple of weeks, that there is enough, that enough manna, enough sustenance will fall upon us, that we are enough within us, that we have enough, and that the core teachings of our tradition are teachings that remind us to love the other, the stranger, and not only when it's easy, but especially when it's hard, especially when we're being bombarded with stories of fear, when our fear and our trauma is being mobilized. May we hold on to the fact that the core tradition, our inheritance that we talk about with such pride, isn't about the inheritance of the land, for God's sakes. It's about the inheritance of loving the other, of building a world of justice and equity and care, of seeing the divine in one another, of jubilee, redistribution of wealth, of remembering that the land is the divine's and we are mere sojourners on it. And that above all, we should love. Amen. Thank you all. I'm sorry we didn't get further through the story, but you can all pick it up and read it. It's such a great story, and we'll continue in a couple weeks. Oh, and we'll do the announcements in a couple minutes. Austin, let's remember about February. We'll do the blessing after reading the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu brucha haya shechina notenet haTorah. Amen. Ki lekatov natati lachem Torati al ta'azovu etz chaim hi lemachazikim ba v'tomcheha me'ushar, bless you, deracheha Darchei Noam Bechol Netivoteha Shalom Hashivenu Yud He Vavei Elecha ונשובה חדש ימינו כקדם.